Okay, let's go ahead and get started because we've got a lot of information to cover this evening. And I suspect at least a couple of you will be interrupting me throughout it, so I need to be ready. Yeah, there are people nodding already, so I need to be ready for that as well. Oh, here comes somebody who has the same claim I do, so that's good. I was going to tell you why I did this in the first place. This was prepared for Sojourners. It was really a personal project that I did just for the fun of it because I was interested. One of the things that qualifies me to talk about this topic, not this topic so much, but the main part of this presentation is the fact that I've been at North Church forever and a day. We first came here when I was 6 years old, which means that it's been almost 54 years that I've been at North Church. So the North Church history that I'm going to talk about here is history that by and large I experienced personally. One of the things that was really interesting to me when I started thinking about this was there was a lot of North Church history that I had a pretty poor idea of. You know, I was a high school kid and it all was kind of blurry and I didn't know some of the things that had happened during the time I was here, but I was pretty shaky on them. So I did some interviews and I dug some archives out and I got a lot of information about things that had happened at North Church starting back in my high school days. So it's a long-time North Church history. I wanted to give you some context just to put that North Church history against as you worked with it. And so I put together a short slideshow at the beginning just to give you a little sense of the history piece. Some of this may be very familiar to you, some of it may not. I'm going to go through that part very quickly because I want to focus on the part that's North Church. And so I took the beginning slides and I converted them basically into a timeline for you so that you could have that timeline in your hands later, or so you wouldn't say later, hey, Eric, skip that first half of the presentation because he went through it really fast. So let's go ahead and jump on in. Anyway, I'm excited to see Sarah Ellen Mamlin here because her name comes up several times in this presentation. So she can So she, you know, it's nice to have a fellow person who's part of that history in here as well. So, all right, let's go ahead and walk through the first part of this and just talk a little bit about the generic history. What I put together first was just kind of a generic timeline to give you a sense of things that were happening at a particular time. And on your handout, I called it a long history because I'm going back to 1924. In that history, just to give you, some big events. And it is a very limited history in some ways. It talks about the United States, so it does not talk about all the many interesting things that would have happened around the world that would have fit in here. And it doesn't talk about ancient history, it talks about modern history. So it starts out in 1924. It doesn't tell you things that probably happened in the 1800s and 1700s and that kind of stuff. But I thought it would give us kind of a runway to get to the North Church history if we talked about the generic history first. So this timeline starts out in 1924 and just talks about major events that took place in some of the years back then. Oops, sorry. Yeah. Is that better? All right. It starts out in 1924 and it works its way through some history. It talks about the earliest Society for Human Rights, and I'll talk about that in just a few seconds, which was the earliest known gay rights organization that was found. It talks about Kinsey's work in 1948 and the things that were done by Alfred Kinsey. It talks about a group that was an advocacy or lobbying group that tried to promote ideas about equality and fair treatment of homosexual communities as well, and one of the earliest lesbian organizations as well. Just to talk a little bit more about that or show you a little more, here is that house in Chicago where that first group was formed, the Society for Human Rights. It is a place where you can still go see. There's a picture of the house and there's a nice plaque on the front of it so you can see it, honoring Henry Gerber, the guy who was the founder of this organization, one of the very first human rights organizations there were. Sunil talked in the sermon today about voluntourism, so here's a bit of your historitourism, a chance for you to drive up to Chicago and see the plaque up there. Yeah.
There's a Gerber Library.
Oh, named for him as well. Yeah. Excellent. Very good. Thank you. I don't, but...
I'm looking up.
Troy's already planning his trip right now, so. This is also an ad that was run by that society, the Mattachine Society, and it was run in the, I think, the Washington Post, talking about how you should reach out to a group that feels that homosexuals need to be treated the same way everybody else does. It's interesting, their illustration, apparently, of a homosexual is a zebra that has spots instead of stripes. So I thought it was an interesting enough ad that I put it on your handout. So you have a copy of it to take home with you. After that, we move into more modern times. In 1962, we have the Illinois becoming a group that passed legislation to stop discrimination against homosexual. Did you find it?
Lincoln Park area.
Lincoln Park area, all right. And then we come to probably an event that everybody's at least heard of, which is the Stonewall riots, and I'll come back to that in just a second. In 1973, the American Psychiatric Association pulled homosexuality out of the DSM-3, so it was no longer listed as a mental disorder. And then Harvey Milk began to rise as a political figure in San Francisco in '76. And I've got a couple pictures of the Stonewall riots here, just to talk about the Stonewall riots. This is the actual Stonewall Inn. I put a picture of it in your handout. And then these are folks protesting outside it. The Stonewall riots were an interesting event because there had been ongoing issues at the Stonewall Inn for a long, long time. Folks met there, and then every now and then police cracked down on them, and folks met there, and every now and then police cracked down on them, and folks met there, and every now and then police cracked down on them. And one night, according to modern transsexual communities, transgendered communities, it was transgendered folks particularly there that kind of set the police off in a big way that kicked off the biggest bust of folks, which kicked off the riots themselves. So. Then in the more modern history, we come through to Harvey Milk being elevated in as a member of the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, and the assassination of Harvey Milk and the person who elevated him to that position, also in 1978. There was a large march for equal rights in 1979. There had been several smaller ones, but this one had a tremendous number of people show up to participate. Then the Democratic National Convention added a homosexual plank about rights for all groups, and they listed the groups that were there, including explicitly sexual orientation. And in '82 and '84, states began to outlaw discrimination based specifically on sexual orientation. Feel free again to stick something in here if you want to. I'm moving pretty fast through this because I'm getting to the North Church part, but I just wanted to lay some groundwork for you so you had it. Here's a picture of Harvey Milk. I put next to him the picture of Sean Penn being Harvey Milk because I always think it's amazing to watch how they make people look like celebrities. And so on the right is Sean Penn, in case you don't know. But this is he, and this is the headline on the San Francisco Examiner itself on the day of the assassination. And this is that massive march I was talking about in 1979. You can see that it's a large group of people, and they were prepared and had good signage and marched down to ask for fairness, especially judicial fairness. All right, last part coming down to modern times. This is a collection of events that took place. You can see in 1993, Don't Ask, Don't Tell was implemented as part of the military policy, saying that you didn't have to be kicked out of the military if you were homosexual, but you couldn't tell anybody. You had to keep it a secret as part of that. In 1996, strike down. You'll notice that didn't put a lot of the events where people raised new discriminatory practices. It's mostly the opening or movement of gay rights. So Colorado, Vermont, and then probably the most famous thing that happened along those lines was the repeal of the decision against the sodomy laws in Texas which are here. These are the two gentlemen who were involved in that case. They were the plaintiffs in the case, and they took this all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said that it was an invasion of privacy, that it was a right to privacy law, and overturned the sodomy laws at that point. I put this article, you probably can't read it from here. I just thought it was kind of funny. It is Wolf Blitzer is interviewing Kid Rock. And Kid Rock said he thought it was great that they overturned the sodomy laws because the way he saw it, it meant there were more chicks for him, which I just thought was one of the funniest articles I'd ever seen in a paper. And the commentator who wrote the article at the bottom said, you need to remember this is a guy named Kid talking to a guy named Wolf, so just take it as you will. But I thought it was kind of a funny response to a fairly significant event. And the last of my little lines, civil unions becoming legal in Connecticut, civil unions becoming legal in New Jersey, and then the House of Representatives putting in place a workplace fairness bill. After that, things start to move at a pretty good clip, and so I ended up having to put all the events in a year on a slide. So we end up with a full slide for each one. And again, I'm not going to spend a long time on these. These are all on the handout that I gave you, but I want you to have that sense that it was kind of steadily moving along, that state by state by state by state, these decisions were being made. Individual Supreme Courts were also making those kind of decisions to either protect rights, or to decide that there could be same-sex unions, or to decide that marriage should be legal, or all those kind of things happening on a state by state by state by state by state basis. And here we continue on and on and on and on. And one of the most important things here is this one. This is President Obama signing a referendum allowing same-sex partners of federal employees to get benefits. And you probably can't see it too well, but I put a picture in your handout that I don't have on the slide. And it's President Obama signing that legislation and handing the pen to Frank Kameny, the guy who'd lost his job years and years and years previous to that because of his sexual orientation. And it's just a really nice moment as Obama hands him the pen after signing the bill. And he's just a spunky, fragile-looking older man who's, very happy to be there that day and receive that from him. So yeah, go ahead.
An executive order?
No, it was.
Referendum isn't the right word.
Yeah. So, yeah, but he did sign it, so. He also posthumously awarded Harvey Milk the Presidential Medal of Freedom that same time, so in that same period. Again, state by state by state by state, the slow march here, and this includes the Congress actually repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell, so that Don't Ask, Don't Tell went away and no longer was there. 8 Republicans crossed the aisle in order to side with Democrats in getting that done. And additionally, state by state by state by state, and it's in your hand. One of the funniest things on this is May 9th, when President Obama officially said that he supported same-sex marriage. He had, previous to that, made several statements which included the "I am evolving on this idea." But it was funny because his vice president, who was Vice President Biden at the time, was way out and ahead on that and had already made a strong statement about this is something he thought was right. And the vice president previous to him, which is kind of funny, also felt that way because, of course, that's Dick Cheney, whose daughter was gay. So vice presidents apparently run way ahead of presidents on these kind of things. Then Tammy Baldwin, the first openly gay elected official in the Senate. And then it gets to go really, really fast here for a while, and you can see it happening again. The Supreme Court debating the issue of gay marriage up at the top, marriage legislation passing in Rhode Island, and in state by state by state as we go. And that brings us up to June 25th, 2014. June 25th, 2014 was when the federal judge in Indiana struck down the marriage restrictions in Indiana, and same-sex marriage became legal in Indiana. Of course, the Attorney General said he was going to appeal it, but at that point in time, it became legal in Indiana. And this was one of the big banners that went up at that time, so I added it here. And that brings us up to June 26, 2015, which is when the Supreme Court struck down, the National Supreme Court struck down restrictions on gay marriage, and it became legal throughout the country. I put up the official notice that there was going to be a gathering here at North Church because I think that's a significant piece of the story we're trying to tell. That evening at 6 p.m., there was a large gathering here at North Church. And this is that large gathering. There's a lot of people there. Even I'm there. So that's me. This is that gathering at North Church. It was a huge, happy, celebratory gathering. Standing up at the front of the church were couples who'd participated in the lawsuit itself, but there was a tremendous outpouring. The sanctuary was full, like we haven't seen it in many years now. We haven't had that kind of packed sanctuary in a long time at this point, but it was quite an exciting day to be here. There were so many people, and they were so happy about what was going on, and there was nobody who wasn't, which was nice too. You know, when we're down at Pride, there's always a few people who are unhappy we're there, so it was fun to be in a group of people who were all happy about what was happening that day. So this idea that North Church fills up with people and all the people are happy about same-sex marriage being legal is a very modern North Church idea. And this is sort of what made me want to gather information about this, is that it feels like a lot of us, especially those of us who've not been here a long time, sort of feel like North Church has been that way all the time. That, you know, we talk all the time about how North has a long history of being welcoming, and North has a long, you know, it's part of North's culture to be welcoming. And it is now. It is now part of North Church tradition to be a welcoming community. But North Church hasn't always been exactly that welcoming. North Church has had a long struggle to get where it was going. And I really did this for myself. I thought it was important to try and get the information about what it took North Church to get there, because it's sort of lost in history. The people who were there are getting old like me or dying, and so there's a lot of information that's going away. A lot of the church archives are not generally available, so they're things you can't get your hands on. Many people don't know who the characters were or what they did, and there's some great stories, good and bad, from back in that time period. And so I wanted to capture that so that it could be part of North's history too, so that we didn't always think, oh, we're the best, and we do this great, and we're good at this. So my intention was to make a slideshow about North Church history and what happened at North Church. As I said, I came here when I was 6, and I grew up in North Church, and for a long time I was kind of blissfully unaware of what went on around me at North Church. I participated in Sunday school, I participated in youth group, and when I was in youth group here, we hired a minister whose name was John Ailshire, who many of you may know. He's here in town. He's a great guy. He was head of the Little Red Door for a while. He was head of the Humane Society for a while, so you may have encountered him in one of those ways. And he came here to North Church. He finished his seminary experience in 1975 and then was assigned to North Church as a deacon. He was to be here for a year and then to be ordained as a Methodist minister. I remembered John Ailshire very fondly, and I remembered that weird things happened when he was here. I did not know what they were, and it turns out what I remembered was mostly wrong. So I decided I would call John Ailshire and that we would have a meeting, and I would say, what happened when I was in a youth group, because I don't know the story. And so he and I had a really nice conversation. We talked for an hour or more, and he told me all kinds of stories, some of which were appropriate to put in the slideshow and some of which were not, that kind of filled me in on what happened during his tenure here. So when he came here, he was wrestling with his sexuality. It was confusing to him. His understanding was that God viewed homosexuality as bad, but that he was attracted to men and he didn't know what to do with that. It was a difficult struggle for him. And I think it made it harder because he was unsure of how he felt about it. Was this something he should embrace? Was this something he should reject? Was he called to be celibate and pretend this part of him didn't exist? I mean, he really was struggling a lot with those kind of things. And he said one of the things that made his struggle more interesting was that when he went to conferences like General Conference and Annual Conference, he would see district superintendents and other folks he knew were important folks in the church in gay bars that he went to, and that confused him even more. He couldn't quite figure out what that meant. You know, did that mean it's okay? Did that mean it wasn't okay? He was really pretty confused about how that fit in with what he should do in his life. There's a nice young picture of John Hillshire. The point where his career kind of came to a peak, I mean, he worked with this and it was difficult for him. He did some interesting things like when I was in youth group, he had one program where an anonymous gay person called in and talked to us so that we could ask questions, which was a really educational and interesting program for the youth group. So we could just ask questions with, you know, kind of no filters and be able to ask. So he did a lot of interesting programming, but all the same time struggling and somewhat suppressing his own sexual preferences. And it sort of all came to a head when somebody came to town to perk up what was going on. That somebody is Anita Bryant. Anita Bryant, yeah. Anita Bryant was a famous former Miss America, right? And who had gone into selling oranges. Orange juice. She was the public face of orange juice, generically for the orange juice industry in Florida. And she kind of had that happy, sunshiny face. And she became the face of the anti-homosexual movement. She made some strong statements and started participating in rallies for decency. And here's a promotional pamphlet for the one that was going to kind of set everything in motion here, that took place October 7th at the Coliseum at the State Fairgrounds. And not only was she going to sing there and perform at the Rally for Decency, but this man, who you may or may not recognize, does you know who he is? Joe's working on it, I see. This is Greg Dixon, the pastor of the Indianapolis Baptist Temple. You may remember him more recently for the time he was locked inside the church because he hadn't paid tax things he had due, and the FBI and SWAT teams did a siege on the church and carried him away. But he was there, and he was working with her for this particular rally, and it was held here in town, and it really brought this issue to people. They had to kind of decide where they were going to come down on this, and I don't know if you can see it, but her slogan was tossed around a lot too. The orange juice slogan she did not eventually end up with the orange juice company because of some of this. As part of this, you were asked if you came to the rally to fill out a Yes Anita form in which you said you wanted to help bring America back to God by solving the problem of homosexuality. And these were passed out to people, and they were asked to check them, fill them out, and turn them back in to build these legions of people who would fight on behalf of it. But at the same time, a lot of people disagreed with this, disagreed with Anita Bryant, disagreed with Greg Dixon, and took stands to say that they felt strongly that she was not standing for what they stood for. You may wonder, even though it's just down the street, none of this necessarily had to impact North Church. All of this, is happening just down our street at the State Fairgrounds. But what happened at that time is that a group of ministers got together and decided that they would publish a letter saying they just don't feel this way, that they don't believe God wants people to attack homosexuals, oppose homosexuals. They want to be supportive. They believe that homosexuals should be supported by the church, loved by the church, welcomed by the church. And they all signed the letter, and it was largely led by John. He worked hard to make that possible. But if you look at the list of names, you'll see other people on here you might or might not recognize as well. One of my personal favorites is Albert Galloway. That would be my father on there. But Richard Bruner was the associate pastor here at North Church at the time that that happened. And Norman Morford, Byron Stroh was at this point the former senior pastor of North Church and signed it as well. So there are a whole bunch of names up there. And the Sassos are on here too somewhere. Down at the bottom, Sandy and Dennis Sasso, the rabbis at Bethel Zedek, right? And other names you may recognize if you've been around the church for a while. There are a lot of people on here who either have been to North Church or served at North Church or had some part of North Church. And this sort of kicked up the controversy. People who chose to sign this were in somewhat opposition to what the Book of Discipline was saying and what the church was saying. And so they were, a group of rabble-rousers causing trouble. And it caused a lot of to-do, but eventually kind of settled down. It was not the end of the world for this. But there was another event coming that was going to be much more interesting or much more exciting at North Church. And that was a group called the Metropolitan Community Church, which some of you are probably already familiar with, and started out in California, but began to grow and stretch across the country. Its primary members, its primary leadership were all gay and lesbian men and women. And in 1978, Troy Perry, the founder, asked if they could have a meeting here at North Church. And they came to North Church and said, would you like to have a meeting at North Church? It was approved that they could have a meeting here at North Church. And although Dick Hamilton kind of kept his head low and didn't really make any particular statements on this at this time, several members of the congregation were just unbelievably shocked that the church had agreed to let this group come meet here. The event went on without incident. There was nothing exciting that happened, but it sort of stirred a backlash within the congregation. There were people who became concerned about the way North Church was going and who wanted to do something about North Church. I did put a funny story John told me because I hate to pass up really funny ones. He said once upon a time he was talking to Lester Irons, who was a longtime member of the church and a big donor at the church. And Lester Irons said he was worried that those people would impact the church budget, to which John said, are those people lesbians? And Lester Irons said, I don't know what church they go to. So, but it was the funniest story John told me of the stories that I collected from John. After that, several things. One of them is that John started a group called the Fellowship. And the Fellowship was intended, John had a discomfort with the fact that he was a Christian who was gay, and so the only place that he felt he could meet people who were also gay were in bars and other places like that. And he wished there were places where you could meet folks who were not in bars, who were there because they wanted to meet people and wanted to socialize. And so the Fellowship was started to be that. It was started to be a place where you could meet people without going into an environment that promoted other things that you weren't interested in promoting. And it continues to exist to this day. It is still an organization for that purpose, although it has advocacy. Yeah, Alan.
And I was a member.
Okay.
In 78, 79, 80.
Okay. Anything you want to tell us about it, or?
No.
Okay, all right. So, yeah.
God got me involved, and through that got me involved with affirmation with the Methodist Church, and all sorts of things came from that.
Okay. It did extend itself to be an advocacy group as well. So it has advocacy portions and those kind of things also. But its original intention was to be a social place where people could meet in a healthy, happy environment and get to know other people who had the same preference. By late 1978, the bishop, who John loved to hang out with, he went over to their house and ate with the bishop and his wife all the time. The bishop got the sense that John was too pro-gay. John did not say that the bishop got the sense that he was gay. It was that he was too favorable to gay issues and gay concerns. So he began to get a little uncomfortable in the church. But in 1979, John got a new job and left the church. The church threw a huge party for him, told him how grateful they were that he'd served here, and he left under great circumstances with everybody. I will just tell you that part of the reason I called John was because my memory was that he left unhappy or mistreated. And so I was really happy. It gave me a nice feeling about North Church that despite the fact that I knew there were people who opposed John for several reasons, I was happy to know that the church had sent him off and that his feelings about North Church were warm and happy in that way. It made me feel better about some memories I had as a youth where I sort of felt like we'd done him wrong at some point. So I felt much better after I talked to him. And we chatted for a long time, and it was kind of a nice thing to catch up with him. And
He's still alive?
yeah. And yeah, he worked both at the Little Red Door and the Humane Society. He had a stroke a couple years back, but he's worked his way back pretty well from it, so he's not in bad shape. He was in really bad shape for a while. He posted on Facebook throughout his stroke, which was fascinating because for a while what he posted was largely nonsense. It was kind of word salady and confusing and hard to understand because of the stroke. But it was sort of like being in his recovery because you could see on his Facebook posts how he slowly but surely rebuilt his ability to put sentences together and such. So it was kind of interesting to be a part of his stroke recovery as you read his Facebook postings. He got better and better, and now you can't tell. And now he posts just as badly as everybody else on Facebook. Not long after that, the General Conference came to Indianapolis, and this is, folks, Alan's looking for himself. This is, oh, good. This is a picture of the General Conference being here in Indianapolis. I loved the General Conference in Indianapolis. It was 2 weeks, something like 2 weeks of meetings here in the city. I was in high school, and I told my high school that this was a religious holiday and that I therefore couldn't go to school. And so I got to attend a whole bunch of General Conference because I was out for religious reasons. And it was quite remarkable. I got to attend sessions. I got to see it in action. For years after, I listened to the cassette. It was a cassette I bought of the musical they did. They did a great musical called Where is John Wesley When We Need Him Now, which was just hysterical. It was very funny and all original. And so it was quite a big event and profoundly affected 2 weeks of my high school career. But during that same time, as Alan said, there was a group who had formed within the United Methodist Church, which again continues to exist to this time, and it was called Affirmation. And Affirmation was an advocacy group. Their primary purpose was to get the discipline fixed and to make the church treat the homosexual community fairly, and they worked for full inclusion. And this is the statement of their purpose drawn from their website. This is what they say about their purpose. And Affirmation asked if they could come here and have a meeting at North Church. And it was an interesting time. It was not just North Church who had problems with homosexuals at that time. It was certainly the United Methodist Church, and particularly the Indiana United Methodist Church. And I put a funny story that I thought was really hysterical, but also a little painful. And that is that when the Affirmation folks were coming, and they had 30 or 40 folks that were coming with them, they arranged with one of the local universities to have housing so that they could all be together and they could work together and they could share times of prayer together. And the Methodist Church put pressure on the university to not provide their housing. But they didn't know that till they got here. So they all got here and they didn't have any place to stay. And so this is one of the people who experienced that telling about it. So they all got to the convention center and said, uh-oh, we have no place to stay. What are we going to do? And to hear this person tell it, they fanned out in all directions looking for a place to stay. And a couple of them came upon an adult motel called the San Antonio Inn, which charged $15 $15 an hour for a room. They had rooms for $15 an hour. Not a minute, an hour. $15 an hour for a room. And they thought about it for a few minutes and said, well, what can they say? So they went into this hotel, which for all time after they have called a hooker hotel. And they asked if they could have rooms in the place. And the inn said, well, we have sort of two wings. You can kind of be over there. We'll give you this section. And they, in fact, let them have the entire section, that entire wing, and they charged them $15 a day instead of $15 an hour for the hotel, so that they had a place to stay. And they said they would all come in at the end of the day. They'd been advocating hard at the general conference. They would all come in, they'd stand around, they'd all watch TV together in one or two of the rooms, clustered all the way out into the halls, so that they could see what was going on. And they said the people who owned the motel could not figure out what they were doing and why they were doing it. They said, what are they doing in there? Do you think they need clean sheets? So they all came and clustered together and watched the TV show. So that's kind of...
And we gathered in a conference room or some such bigger area every evening at least, and sang our songs and had our own worship together before people went off to their rooms. I was not technically staying there because I was at UIndy at the time. And I had been asked to drive people from the airport, and all of a sudden I was in this group that was home. And it was amazing. And someday I'll write a book about it. But it was really, my whole life changed in those 2 weeks. And part of that was that we were allowed to have our worship service here in coordination with the Methodist Federation for Social Action, who we often did things together with. And we had worship here in the sanctuary. And I stood at the pulpit and proclaimed the gospel and essentially came out to the church. And that was a big deal.
Okay, thank you. And I'll look forward to reading your book. So this was the beginning of North Church having to deal with this issue. A group of folks came to the Christian Social Concerns Commission, which was chaired, I believe at the time, by Joe and Sarah Ellen Mamlin jointly, and said that they were interested in starting a small group of North Church folks who would meet here, whose primary concerns were that they were gay and lesbian, and they wanted to be able to meet at our church. And it caused quite a hullabaloo. Back then we had a committee that was called the Christian Social Concerns Commission, which later went on to be the Committee on Church and Society. And this is Joe Mamlin, Dr. Joe Mamlin, making an speaking out loud at the administrative board meeting, which is the precursor of the board of directors, and saying that these folks had come, they'd brought a proposal. It was a sketch proposal. They hadn't finished it. It was kind of a draft. They wanted to get it ahead of before they came out with the real proposal, which was going to be more detailed. And this is the real proposal, which was more detailed, that they came and presented to the Board of Church and Society. And basically what it says is they would like to have a group of folks who were affiliated with Affirmation, the Affirmation group that we just talked about, and they would like to meet here at North Church. And they would like to be able to invite people in, and but that right now it was just North Church people, and they would have simple events like brown bag suppers and refreshments where people could visit and socialize and talk about their experience. The Committee on Social Concerns was kind of thrown into a bit of a quandary by this, and you can see a list of the people who were participating up there, and you can see Sarah Ellen and Joe are listed there, and I'm listed there, and other folks who, some of whom are still here, are listed there. The Committee on Christian Social Concerns did not know what its job was when this kind of thing came to them, and the first debate they had was, what's our job here? Is our job to pick a side and advocate on behalf of a side? Is our job to just present this and say, here's what a group wants, and take it to the administrative board or somebody else and see what they think about it? It was kind of a waking for this committee, who had to kind of agonize about what their role was within the church. They didn't know at that point what they were supposed to be doing with the church. Were they supposed to be taking a side or just being fairly neutral? It started quite a thing in the church. There was lots of activity and lots of responses. Those of us who were on the committee began to be given information to inform us of how we were supposed to make our decisions on these things. For example, we were given anti-gay propaganda, anti-gay pamphlets that talked about how we should feel about homosexuality in general. These are two of the ones that I received as a member of that committee. Both of them talking about homosexuality and how it's a lifestyle choice and how it's inconsistent with the gospel and that kind of stuff. And just to let you know that both sides weren't doing it, these are the other pamphlets we were given that were to push us the other direction and tell us about what it was, why homosexuality was consistent with the gospel, and why it was not just a lifestyle choice, and why all those kind of things. And so both these sets of pamphlets were presented to us as members of the church and society, and probably more. These are the ones that I still have to this day, but they in my collection of important papers. But they were all given to us in order to kind of sway us and give us let us know what we should be thinking as good Christians about this. Didn't really make that whole question about what we should be doing about this any easier, that we were getting all this propaganda. And this is the officially printed propaganda. This is not when it became most interesting. When it became most interesting was when North Church people started writing things for us. This is an interesting one. This is someone who thought they were or that's insulting, let me be nice. This is someone who was a fairly clever writer, who was opposed to the affirmation group forming here. They wrote a paper that paralleled the Jonathan Swift paper, A Modest Proposal. If you're not familiar with it, just briefly, A Modest Proposal was Jonathan Swift talking about how you could take the children of poor people and boil them and use them to feed rich people, and then they would serve some useful purpose. It's a satirical article that was intended to joke about the fact that, to help Irish society think about how they needed to treat their poor and their poor children, but it was intended to be hearty satire. A member of North Church, I do not know who because they submitted it anonymously. It would not surprise me if it's somebody who's here yet to this day. Wrote one that was very similar to that compared homosexuality to cannibalism and said, cannibalism is just a lifestyle choice, but we need to, how can we, the phrase is an alternate culinary preference. That we can't discriminate against people with an alternate culinary preference. And so they intended to sway the board by this satirical presentation on the issue. But the real kicker, the thing that probably influenced what happened eventually more than anything else, was that the church secretary, whose name was Mary Beth Hunt, ran a letter writing campaign. And in it, she mailed out letters to everybody she was close to in the church. I've always wondered, and in fact, my parents wondered out loud, whether she used the church mimeograph machine and the church such to do all that. But she wrote these letters at the end saying, it'd be nice if you prayed for the church, but for the rest of the church saying, you need to write a letter to the church, it needs to have your name on it, you need to say that this ain't gonna happen. And she was very clear and very strong in what she said about what she expected. And she was relatively influential. She wasn't just the church secretary, she was also a very active member. And she strongly, strongly advocated that we not let the affirmation group form at North Church. It was her stance that they not be allowed to, and she mailed it out to people, and it worked. She rallied people to write very detailed letters. This is a 4-page letter from the late Steve Bridges, who you may or may not know, but he wrote a letter in which 4 pages of biblical proof texting on why the affirmation group should not be allowed to meet here. If you ever want to read it, it's pretty painful, but if you ever want to read it, I have it, and it goes into great detail about exactly his understanding of the gospel and why. He was a very nice man. He was limited in many ways, but he worked hard to understand what was going on here. And he wrote this it was, I guess scared is, I was going to say angry, but I guess scared is the best. You know, Mary Beth just scared him and said, you know, this evil thing is going to happen in your church, and you need to stand by your church and your God and do something about it. And he wrote his fear into this long letter and sent it to the head chairman of the board at that point, who was Hal Coons. So after that, the church said no. We said that the affirmation group could not meet here, and we were not allowed to start an affirmation group here, and they were sent away. And I don't know what the people who were, most of the people who wrote and asked that happen stayed at North Church, and so they continued to be members at North Church. They just did not have this group to gather with. It did come back in 1993. In 1993, a group asked again if they could meet here. They said, this is really just North Church people. We want to have a North Church group. We're not going to advertise it. We're not really going to invite people in from outside. We want to have a North Church group that can gather together around the issue of homosexuality, support each other, find peace and inside the church. The church decided to have a program where we met over a period of time, and that included passing out, that they asked a part about being a reconciled congregation as part of that, and we had a long series of meetings. They were incredibly painful meetings. People on both sides told painful stories, but many people who had been rejected by the church, whose children had been rejected by the church, came and cried at the microphone. We met in here, we filled this room, we had microphones where people could stand and talk, and people cried and cried and hugged, and it was quite an amazing experience, all told, as part of this. And we prepared study guides so that we could have them available to talk about the issues. And it dealt with both sides of the issues. It presented some of the issues from both sides of the folks. And we passed them out as part of that gathering. Oh, I know. At the end of that, I decided to not talk about exactly what happened at the end of that, and I have additional details if you want to ask me about them afterwards. I'm not going to go into it here because there are people still here who I think it shows in a bad light. But at the end of that, the administrative board voted to not let the group meet here and not join any reconciling group, but they said we should have an ongoing study program that we had surrounding that. And the staff vetoed the ongoing study program so that it was not done, and the church turned its attention to capital campaigns. They were worried it would cost the church money. They were worried it would cost the church the ability to build the west entry that we use today. And so they said, we're just not going to really talk about this anymore. We're going to put it away and not deal with this right now. I have a moment for us to read something together. I think you can read it with me. It's on the slide, and then we'll go through the rest of the history, and this is where the history kind of takes a turn. But first, if you'll join me in this moment of prayer. So, gracious God, although we remember our story to be one of welcoming and inclusion, we confess that North Church and most Christian churches have a history of oppression and persecution of our LGBTQ siblings. Forgive us our ignorance and our lack of understanding. Let us review our past. Our review of our past make us look at how we are falling short now in loving our neighbor and how we are failing to be the love of Christ in action today. We thank you for your grace and love and promise to work to emulate it. Amen. After that, the church had a gathering in 2010, and the gathering was called the All-Church Radical Hospitality Workshop. The All-Church Radical Hospitality Workshop also filled this room with people. This is the room where it was held. And at it, we broke up into small groups, and at those small groups, people were to suggest ways in which the church could show hospitality. How could the church be more welcoming to people in general? And a lot of important things came out of that, but at many, many, many of the tables, the idea of joining RMN, the Reconciling Ministries Network, came up and was added to the list, one of the top things that we should do. In addition to that, other things that you may take for granted today came up. For example, cutting the pews so that there was room for wheelchairs was part of it. Better signage, large bulletins for those who have visual problems, better hearing assistance, many things to help folks who were disabled in the congregation. There were a lot of interesting suggestions. It was an amazing event because people really, really spoke up and said, these are the things I wish North Church were doing. And as part of that, as an outgrowth of that, the church did a lot of things that moved it in that general direction. I mentioned here that kind of on their own, a Sunday school class called Leaven, which was here for a long time, had its own listserv as part of the church, took a group of folks, but not really the church as a whole, and went and began to participate in Pride by marching in the parade down there. And this is the Lynn Berkerbile reporting to the administrative board, the board of directors at that point, that they'd gone down and encouraged folks to join them and marched in the parade in 2011 as well. The outgrowth of some of that work was that there had been a group of Sunday school classes who were frustrated that North Church had not joined RMN. The Reconciling Ministries Network came with, some responsibilities. You had to give them a donation annually. You had to put a welcoming statement on your website that publicly proclaimed your support for the mission that they did. You generally had to use their logos in your promotion so that people were aware that you were a part of their programming or part of their support network. And North Church had not, up to then, as you've kind of seen, been in a place where it was going to do that. And finally, some Sunday school classes just were sick of it and said, hey, we're just going to do it ourselves. And so several Sunday school classes here, the Amazing Grace class, the Power and Light class, and the New Corinthians class, all over that year, 2010 and into 2011, officially affiliated with the Reconciling Ministries Network and became reconciling classes. Even though they weren't reconciling churches, they were reconciling classes. And so they basically were these little pools of reconciliation in the North Church environment. And then in March 2nd, a petition was submitted to the church, to the board, on behalf of those three classes. The petition was a proposal for North United Methodist Church to declare itself a reconciling congregation. And this is the introduction of that document. It says, over the past 30 years, North has struggled with this issue to make a formal statement of support for the LGBT community, and said, in light of our historical inability to move forward, pools of adults had already formed consensus and joined the reconciling congregation group. It also said that the Sojourners class, I just want to get myself in there, the Sojourners class was on its way. We hadn't made it yet, but we were on our way to doing it. We were discussing it in our classes at the time that this petition was submitted. And it said that there are many leadership people who were part of this, but that they were working together and they wanted to show that there was a support. Probably the most interesting thing, in my opinion, in it was that it said, one way or another, the church needed to make a decision on this. No more tabling this issue. No more putting this issue for next year or the year after or till this capital campaign was done or till we'd built this pretty part or whatever. It said, one way or another, when you're done with this, if you got to say no, but say something for a change so that we have some outcome that we can deal with. So that people can say, am I going to stay at this church? Am I going to leave this church? Am I going to, whatever you're going to do, so that you had some information to work with. We also kind of laid out in the petition 3 steps, which were kind of interesting too, I thought. The first one said, we say immediately join RMN. The second one said, if you can't join RMN right away, form a ongoing study, short-term study that will answer the question one way or another. And the third one said, if you can't do either of those for some reason, get a statement of welcome on all our public presentations, on the website, in our bulletin, in our North publications, that shows our support, shows a statement of inclusion, so that it will be clear where North Church stands on this. And so it was kind of laid it out. This, if not this, then this. If not this, then at least this was laid out. But the goal was to come up with something. This is the original petition. And you could see it was a pretty serious thing. It walked through pluses and minuses that were concerns. It talked about what the official Book of Discipline stances were and what things in the Book of Discipline could be seen as supportive of us joining RMN. It talked about what would be involved and what effect it might have on the budget. And it gave a series of possible statements of inclusion that could be put into church publications. And these were actually largely stolen from other churches and globally find and replace feature in Word to put North Church's name in where the other churches were. So there were many, many churches that had beautiful statements at that point. And so we borrowed them over several pages here and made them available as part of that. So this is that petition that was actually submitted at that point in time. This petition is what eventually resulted in the church joining the Reconciling Ministries Network. It was the result of this petition at this time that the church finally voted yes and said we were going to be a part of the Reconciling Ministries Network. There was a lot of debate, and a lot of angst, and a lot of anger, and a lot of tears, and a lot of hugging, and those kind of things. It was interesting that in the initial statement, in order to make the board happy when they passed it, it did have statement number 5, which says, this doesn't mean we're going to do things that are explicitly forbidden by the discipline, including same-sex marriages in the sanctuary. And so the initial vote to join RMN included an explicit statement saying we won't be doing same-sex weddings in the sanctuary. The board later specifically passed something that reversed that, but initially when we first joined RMN, there was an explicit statement against same-sex marriages being performed here, not against same-sex marriages. Later that same year, the board of directors put together a welcome statement for North Church, and they put together 2. Mark's probably looking at these and going, hey, those are my notes. Mark was the secretary, the profoundly talented secretary of the board for a long time who...
I was also the chair of the committee.
And the chair of the committee too, so he had a lot to do with a lot of this documentation. So there's a tiny little one that's this one up here, and the tiny little one was intended for what we realized as a committee, because I was on the board at this time, what we realized was that you didn't always have room for a huge old welcome statement that listed everybody you welcomed every time and every circumstance and those kind of things. So we prepared a tiny little welcome statement that said, we are very inclusive and you are welcome at North Church, and that's about it. And then a detailed welcome statement that talked about who was welcomed at North Church and why they were welcomed at North Church and our understanding of where that welcoming came from. So we have 2 welcome statements. One of the most interesting things about this document is that it was voted also that the welcome statement, and you can yell at me if you want to here, that this welcome statement would be read periodically from the pulpit so that you would be reminded that North Church felt this way. And we sort of lapsed on that. We did it a few times and we sort of lapsed on it, but you may remember recently, thanks to the leadership of Eric Leckberg on the Ministries Council, that who had read it? Was it Lydia? Lydia Shaw, who heads Mission and Outreach, read the welcome statement in the sanctuary. And in November, because we voted to try and do it quarterly from now on, you'll hear it again. So you'll get to hear that welcome statement in November again when that time comes up. So we're back to reading this probably about quarterly so you can remember what North Church stands for and what we voted for. So there were some positive and some negative ramifications. A lot of people were happy. There were a lot of good feelings. There was a lot of community that was generated by it. We had a group that was founded in the kind of a committee that was in charge of kind of keeping us in touch and responsible to our RMN responsibilities. But we did have people leave the church. There were a set of families that left the church at this time, and 2 or 3 of them were huge donors who gave really substantial amounts of money to the church. And so the church has struggled kind of to get back to where it was financially. We're better now than we were, but there were many lean years where those big chunks of money that had been being given by those families were greatly missed in the annual budget. Those people were very angry. Some of them were people who'd been at North Church for a long time. Interestingly, just as a side note, in one case, a father left, but their children stayed. In another case, a husband left, but a wife stayed. So it's interesting. It's split some families and put people in different circumstances because of it. But it was interesting. And the shortfall of the budget for many years shortly thereafter was exactly the amount of many of those large donors put together. So it was easy to account for why that suddenly was a thing we had to struggle with. It's like they just needed a slower pace. It's kind of like they needed a slower pace. They needed to go to a church that was moving just a little slower. So really, all the way up the row, us and Meridian Street and Second Pres and St. Luke's have all had different struggles with those. At the same time we were doing this, Kevin Armstrong said, the pastor at Second Pres, which is a relatively conservative church, had contacted him and said, we're struggling with this too, can you give us some resources? So all of Meridian Street was struggling with it at slightly different paces at that time. So yeah, this should be history you guys all remember, so you're welcome to pitch in as you. The next thing that happened, as far as I could gauge, as far as significant North Church history along these lines, is the HJR 6 resolution, which was to prohibit gay marriage in Indiana, same-sex marriage in Indiana. This was a interesting time at North Church because eventually, the Justice and Advocacy team drafted something that was approved. But before that, let me skip ahead and come back. Before that, there was a lot of issue at that point about how to make a statement at North Church. And it caused a lot of pain and a lot of angst among people here at North Church, because some folks wanted the church to make a quick statement and say something, because this was a pressing issue and something needed to be said. And other folks said, we need to meet, we need to talk, we want to support you, but we got to get together and work on this a bit. And one of the results of that was this, which was the board of directors created what they called a delegation of authority statement, which gave the Ministries Council the authority to speak for the church to decide which topics and which things we would speak on behalf of the church out. And the Ministries Council struggled greatly with this. They couldn't figure out, there was a lot of agony here. And this all happened after the HJR decision was made. But But they came back because they said, we need to be better positioned in the future to be able to figure out who speaks for the church. When there's an advocacy issue, when there's a green team issue, when there's those kind of things, who can say we support coming out against coal? We support this stance on abortion. We support, how do we do that? We have people in the church who have mixed feelings about this. As chair of Green Team, can I tell this story? As chair of Green Team, I had somebody come to me one time and tell me, hey, listen, buddy, you need to stop talking bad about coal because that's my retirement. And all my retirement money comes from coal, and if you keep bad-mouthing coal, it's going to hurt my retirement. And so deciding, it was a funny thing, it was like a mobster thing. Figuring out who could talk for the church, who could say the church believes this or the church believes that was a painful thing. And we made some guidelines that, that the Green Team, for example, could say Green Team supports Beyond Coal's goal of getting rid of coal. But that we couldn't say North Church supports getting rid of coal, that would require an entirely different process. We'd have to bring it to Eric's Ministries Council, and he'd have to pass it through the Ministries Council. They'd have to see if there was a process necessary, and we have to come up with an answer. The result of this one, HJR 6, was that the church supported took a stand to support marriage equality. The Justice and Advocacy team put together a statement saying that the church would support marriage equality, and that marriage equality we saw as a natural expression of the love of God, and that it was, we saw it as that all people who loved another person should be able to marry that person. So, so the end result was a statement on behalf of the church that, on behalf of the entire church, approved by both the Ministries Council and the Board of Directors, that opposed HJR 6 and supported same-sex marriage. Two other recent additions that are resources that North Church has made available fairly recently. The North Church Declaration was an initiative of Darren. Darren wanted us, as the church struggled over splitting, as you all know, the Methodist Church, the Global Methodist Church has recently been formed, and conservative churches, largely around this single issue, are leaving our church. 200 churches disaffiliated at annual conference this year in order to join the Global Methodist Church. And Darren felt that we needed to provide guidance as a church who'd been through these issues and struggled with these issues, that we needed to provide guidance to others who were dealing with these issues. And one of the first things that was made available as part of this was the North Declaration. And the North Declaration is a statement of both biblical and Wesleyan traditions and how they support the stance that North Church has as far as LGBTQ issues and inclusion go. And it is available on our website. If you go to the About link and you click on What We Believe, this is one of the two resources on this issue that you'll find there, is the North Declaration. Darren pulled together groups. He invited folks to sit with him. We hammered it out. We criticized the parts that weren't so good and supplemented the parts that were good, and came up with a final statement that's there and available for you to read on our website about North Church's stance on homosexuality in the church. And also on our website is a book that Darren also keeps printed to give to folks who are considering North Church as a church, that goes through and talks about North Church and the LGBTQ believer. And as it says up at the top, it's intended to look at all the biblical and theological issues surrounding inclusion of folks of multiple sexual preferences and genders, and deal with those kind of things. He says he designed it to give clarity to people who are considering membership at North Church, and he hopes it helps them grow in Christ. So that's the introduction. It's on the first page. There's a whole lot more in it. If you haven't read it, it's also on the About What We Believe link on our website, so that you can read about what the church is saying. You can even give Darren feedback on either of these if there are things you strongly disagree with or think need boistering or help. He's welcome. He will welcome you in giving feedback on those kind of things. That brings us to Pride. I wanted to end on a really happy note, and Pride is always a really happy note. This is the 2013 Moment for Mission script that we used. It's Ben and Eric and I, and in it, Ben and Eric go to the front of the church, and Eric Galloway and a group of disruptors start shaking hands with people throughout the congregation. And as I shake hands with people throughout the congregation, Eric yells out, "Hey, what are you doing out there?" And I said, "I'm showing radical hospitality." And Eric said, "Well, I've got a way for you to show radical hospitality." And then Ben and Eric take turns explaining to me what pride is, so why we all pay attention and learn about it. So that was the invitation for the church to come join us at the pride events, both the booth and the parade. And I thought probably the happiest thing to end on would be some pictures of us actually at Pride, and they're a little hard to see with the lighting. Beth, do you want to turn off the next light? But this is 2014 Pride, and you could probably see some people here you recognize. You may see yourself. You may see people who are no longer here or people who are with us. Beth is going to kill that light, which might make it a little easier to see. There you go. Yeah. So, and you'll see some people there every year.
The triplets being towed in their choo-choo.
Yeah. And there's 2016 Pride. Take careful note of Amy Sell's face, because it appears that way in many pictures. That apparently is her primary picture-taking face. So, and here's the booth up here. You can see folks sitting at the booth. It's pretty sparse. It doesn't have much in it at that point. And Brandon's there almost every year. He faithfully comes each year, Brandon Colleen. And Darren's in a bow tie. I don't know what was going on that Sunday, so. And here's 2017 Pride. And you can see our booth now is bedecked with many things. We've learned so many lessons over the years doing this. You can see now we've got signs, and we've got banners, and we've got balloons, and we've got verticals. One of the things we realized we lacked one year was stuff that people could see as they walked by. So now we have vertical things that stand up in the environment. And there's the truck, and here's Darren and I doing a moment for mission for it. Darren is holding up a picture of all the people the previous year marching in Pride while I tell about it. So, and this year, I skipped to this year. Here's the folks marching in this year's. There's Tim marching with Brandon there, and there's our new Brandon as well. And take a note of Amy Sell's face. You'll notice it's quite the same. And this year our booth was overflowing with stuff. We had stickers, which were the most popular thing ever. I've never seen anything like it. Everybody wanted a sticker. And what we realized was, although we had stickers to represent many different groups, the lesbian stickers sold out just like that. Lesbian stickers are the most popular thing. So next year, we got to really stock up on lesbian stickers so that we have plenty. Yeah. It was such fun. Yeah, next year maybe some sticker ripping in advance too. So, so let's, Beth, if you want to hit the lights again. That's all I've got. I welcome questions and responses and answers. I've already expanded the slideshow since I did it for Sojourners, so I am welcome for any information you want to give me that expands it further.